Welcome to Revenue Mavericks, the podcast where today's most iconic GTM leaders break down the mindset and the moves that defy the status quo. In each episode, operators share the playbooks they've used to change the game and deliver outsized growth. And now, here's the host of Revenue Mavericks, CEO and co-founder of Carrot, Justin Schreiber.
Welcome, everyone, to Revenue Mavericks. I am extremely excited to be joined today by John Belle, who is the Chief Revenue Officer at JustWorks. We are going to have a great conversation today, and that's because John brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to the show. Currently, he sits on the Chief Revenue Advisory Board for Bain Capital Ventures. He's a veteran of PayPal, CA Technology. He's been at Veritas, Symantec. John, you have paid your dues in the world of sales, as they say. So thank you for joining us today.
No, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for the invite, Justin. It's good to see you again.
All right. Well, John, we're going to dive straight in. And I always like to start with a question that allows us to get to know our guest a little bit more. And that question is, share with us an experience that you had not related to your professional world, but that you feel has shaped you as an executive.
You know, it's such an interesting, I think, a great question about a great place to start. It strikes me we spend so much time as professionals talking about our career and what got us here, but we often gloss over the question that you're asking, which is more or less about how your formative years got you there, and what is it like outside of work that causes you to be who you are. So I think it's a great question. I think for me, one of the biggest influences on my life was the fact that I actually didn't grow up in the United States. I had the privilege when I was very young. My father took a job overseas in the Philippines. And until I went to high school, I lived outside the U.S. And then subsequently, after high school in the States, ended up going to university in Japan. Also because my family moved overseas. So in that regard, a really, I think, interesting sort of upbringing. And I was reflecting on this question, and I think what probably is noteworthy about all of that is I've learned from having done that there's some certain stages that you go through as a young person, a young expatriate, if you will. Like the first is you end up in this international community and you immediately identify from where you came from. So you become, in my case, hyper-American. You know who all the NFL quarterbacks are. You know how to play hockey, and which doesn't come in handy, by the way, in Southeast Asia as much as you might think. And so you do that, and you express yourself, and you find your place in that community that way. Then there's this other phase where you start to get to know people. You get to know your classmates. You get to know your teachers. You get to sort of begin assimilating, not just in the local culture, but you find yourself going over to their house to have dinner or play after school. And you learn what the household of a kid from Belarus is like, or the kid from Sweden, or the kid from China. And you begin, I think, to see and experience things that maybe you hadn't before, but they're still the same things, they're just different than they were in your house. And I think the third phase you go through is sort of like, oh, now we're teammates. We might be playing sports together or doing projects together in school. And so all of that sort of begins, I think, to shift your perspective. And I guess just to make all of that sort of sum up to one thing, I think what it gave me was this real sense of neuroplasticity. That's the word, anyway, that I think we can apply to that experience. Yeah. You learn that there isn't one way to do things. There's lots of different ways to cook. There's lots of different ways to play. There's lots of different ways to celebrate. And they may not be the way that you knew coming in, but they're great and they work and people enjoy those things. And so I think if there's one thing that all of that has taught me is I've learned to become much more flexible in my mindset. I think it causes this neuroplasticity. It causes you to be able to be not just more adaptable to the moment, but to think differently about all of the people that you're working with or working alongside, or you need to, in some cases, even sell to. And it lets you be more limber and flexible in all of your approaches.
The experience of studying abroad or living abroad has such an impact on an individual, especially in their formative years. I had an opportunity to live in Chile for 2 years, and I suspect experienced many of the same things that you experienced in your life abroad. But I remember getting down there on the first day, and obviously they speak Spanish. I couldn't speak Spanish very well. I literally felt like I had been robbed of my personality and my ability to create value. And that experience that I had over the next 2 years was me really discovering, who am I? What do I bring to the table? What can I contribute? But I came out of the experience much stronger because I had a much better ability, as you said, to the neuroplasticity, adapt, to learn, and also an understanding of things that I brought to the table that people valued. And that's something that I've drawn on as I move from one company to the next. Those fundamental skills I was able to develop in Chile.
I believe it. I have experienced it with my own kids, is this growth of curiosity. So, it's possible if you never sort of have the sorts of experiences, not just moving overseas, but moving into new environments, moving into environments where you don't naturally speak the metaphorical language.
Yep.
You have to be really curious if you want to learn whatever that language is. You have to be really curious if you want to be somebody who works, either literally works or figuratively works in that environment. So I think there's a lot to that to follow us through.
That word curiosity is such a great word. And again, I'm going back to my days in Chile. I had to overcome my fear and allow curiosity to take over. If someone said something that I didn't understand, I had to make a decision. Do I just kind of move on, or do I say, hey, I don't understand that. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah,
and again, in a professional environment, we're constantly in situations where maybe we don't know, maybe we don't understand. There's a fear there. How am I going to show up? But allowing the curiosity to take over, I think, is really kind of the power tool that we've got in our arsenal.
Look, I'm a CRO. I think that every CRO had better be curious, and maybe that's never been more true than it is right now with all of the changes going on and how work can be done. So if you're not curious by nature, you better be curious professionally.
Yep, I love it. All right, well, that sets the stage then for our next question. You've had a great run throughout your career, obviously now sitting in the top seat from a sales perspective at JustWorks. I'm interested in hearing about an inflection point in your career, a moment that really set the trajectory that you were currently on that landed you where you are today.
Well, look, first of all, there's probably been a lot of them, and I'm not even sure that you really appreciate them or understand them all in the moment. I think a lot of these inflection points show up in the rearview mirror when you begin to recognize the value that they provided you.
Yeah.
For me, one really does stick out, though, and that is I came up in sales as a field sales, enterprise salesperson, and what that meant at the time, in the 90s and in the early 2000s, was it meant that you did big deals. You didn't do a whole lot of them, but you were really super important, and that meant you got to talk to CFOs about how to structure big deals, or you got to bring the CEO to close a deal. And that felt really good at the time. The inflection point, though, was when I got asked to go into inside sales.
Okay.
And I have to, for anybody who's done this journey, what a completely different animal that is. You are no longer thinking about a dozen deals a quarter. You're thinking about 1,200 deals a quarter. You're no longer thinking about how am I going to plan my route around the territory and how is my quarter going to be built out. You're thinking, how am I going to cause all of these people in these offices to be able to execute at the highest possible level? And you're not going to have your finger on the pulse of that business at the same level that you're used to. So becoming a director and ultimately vice president of inside sales was one of the greatest gifts I think I could have had professionally, because it allowed me to start thinking at scale.
Yeah.
And candidly, Justin, the outcome of that was I developed a completely different mindset about what sales is. My original mindset in the field was, I will perform heroic works of sales and I will cause this company to grow.
Single-handedly.
Yeah. And instead, though, what you learn, and I'm sure many of your listeners have gone on a version of this journey, is you learn what I've since come to call the manufacturing theory of sale.
Okay.
Which is, it's simply that you have to be able, if you want to grow at scale, to think systematically about your business, to think about every element of the sales process and each of the people who are involved in it, almost like a factory floor. And that mindset, it was a huge unlock. And as impressive as I thought I was, because I was talking to the CFO about a deal, it actually became more impactful for the company when I could describe, with this sort of investment, I could unlock this sort of outcome.
Yeah. Just going back to that mindset of kind of the hero, the rainmaker, I had the opportunity to interview John McMahon a while back. He's the originator of Medic when he was running sales at PTC. And the backstory behind that, he said, at the time, we did not have a product that was able to go head to head with our competitor. And as a head of sales, I could either just accept defeat or I could figure something else out. And he said, that's when I invented Medic. And the expectation was that we could basically outsell the competition to compensate for the technology. But I think that mindset is the foundation of the hero's mindset. And the reality is that while there are great sellers out there, it's hard to scale that. And that point that you brought up about systems thinking, manufacturing the process that leads to repeatable outcomes, and it allows you to do that at scale, is actually something that is a huge leverage point that leaders have. And if they're really able to master that, unlocks pretty sizable growth for an organization.
Yeah. I mean, that's easy to agree with. And look, it's not that there isn't space in sales today for heroic works, but the truth is, the bigger you get, the less that work is going to impact on the aggregate growth rate of a company.
Yep.
The other thing I learned, and I think this goes hand in glove with your comment, is at the time that I did this, I sort of had this vision that inside sales was less than, for all the reasons maybe you sort of didn't do it. What I came to learn was that inside sales is a lifestyle choice, not a skill set assessment. And the application of the principles of things like Medic are equally valid in an at-scale business. You might use them a little bit differently. They might present a little bit differently to the individual who's doing the work, but the fundamental need to do good sales is still there. And so we found people who were extraordinarily effective using the techniques within the factory models that we'd set up. They just wanted to be home at 6 o'clock to cook for their kids.
Yeah. I want to connect the dots here for a minute, because you've already laid out for us a couple of great touchstones in what comprises an awesome CRO. Number one, curiosity. You talked about a willingness to ask the questions. Number two, the time that you spent in the field allowed you to hone your craft and really understand at a deal by deal level how to create value for customers, close deals. But then this third dimension is introducing systems thinking, scale, manufacturer-like precision. And I actually think it's not an either or, it's all three of those come together in the CRO.
Yeah, unquestionably. The thing that you find is that you, as a CRO, especially as a new CRO to an organization, you have this opportunity to each time step back and write down, literally, this is what I've done, write down what it is you want to teach to the organization. Because I don't think organizations naturally develop in ways that encompass all the things that you and I have just been describing. I do think it takes a purposeful act of leadership and management in order to create that. And I was very fortunate. One of my leaders many years ago gave me what I now consider my definition of leadership. And that is leaders add value by making decisions with judgment and courage and teaching others to do the same. And for me, that's such a beautiful encapsulation of what it means to be a leader. And as a CRO,
can you say that one more time?
Teach. Yeah. Leaders add value by making decisions with judgment and courage and teaching others to do the same.
I do the same. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah. Now, all credit, that was Steve Bennett, the former CEO of Intuit and ultimately at Symantec. So credit to Steve. He gave me that one and I've used it ever since.
All right. I love it. That idea of a leader applying judgment and courage, that can't be discounted because leadership is absolutely about courage. And then the other thing is the empowering leaders, as I think about it, are the ones that essentially multiply impact by helping other people to develop as leaders themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. This is great. We got one more question for you, and that is the secret sauce question. As you think about the craft that you have honed over the past several decades, what is that framework, that process, that philosophy that you've discovered that you feel really delivers outsized results?
Yeah. I kind of just gave the answer, which is my definition of leadership, but I can maybe go a little further in terms of the implementation of that. So there's two things that I've seen. One of them very recently, which I thought was phenomenal, and I'm going to totally steal it from Scott Galloway. Scott Galloway's point was, as a leader of others, you had better be a supplier of surplus value. So in other words, you have got to give out way more than you take in from your team. And I really like that. And he describes that in the context of life in general. I find that to be very useful, especially when I think about being a CRO or a leader of others. Yeah. And that means you really have to be a student all the time, a student of your organization. You have to study externally. You have to be a supplier of surplus value to your team. At the same time, you have to set expectations as to what good looks like. And I had another mentor years past. He actually was telling me the story about a CEO who was very frustrated with his team. And the CEO came to him and he said, "I'm very frustrated. They're not getting the job done. They're not doing what I want." And he said, "Well, explain to me how you've told them what you want." And he's like, "Well, we have these meetings all the time." And my mentor says, "Well, do you get them to agree to this stuff?" CEO pauses and he goes, "Well, I guess, I'm sure they do." And this is the one that did it all. This mentor of mine says, "Expectations without agreement is cowardice." You cannot ask your people to do something and create an expectation if they haven't explicitly agreed that they're going to go do this thing. Orders do not equal results.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what I've done as part of this leaders add value by making decisions with judgment and courage and teaching others to do the same is I've actually written a document. It's 5 slides long and it's big print, so that's not a lot of words. And it's called Who I Want Us to Be. And I give it to all of the leaders of my business and I ask them to bring it to their people. And it's full of simple stuff. None of this is brain surgery, right? Yeah. This is how we'll think about hiring. We want to hire talent. This is what that looks like. This is how we think about operating the business. I don't want hip shots. I want good analysis. But if you make a mistake, you'll be supported. Mm-hmm. And then the very last, it's full of this sort of how I think we ought to operate. And the very last of these pages is, this is what you can expect from me. Mm-hmm. I will consult you. Mm-hmm. We will agree. If we disagree, we'll find a way to move forward together. Things like that. And so I find literally writing these things down and handing them out to people makes a lot of sense. And it goes towards that teaching element I was describing. So I found that to be very fruitful.
The only challenge with that, John, is you actually have to know what your leadership style is and what your expectations are. And that takes some soul searching.
It does. Or you can soul search and, as you clearly heard me say, steal from the best. There are not a lot of new ideas around. And so the good news for anybody who might be, at least in my opinion, anybody who might be sort of wrestling with that comment is you should just start paying a little attention to what's happening There's plenty of this stuff lying around. You have to figure it out for yourself and put it in your own words. It has to be authentic, but the ideas are out there.
And I agree with that. You find different elements, but there's a cohesiveness, and that's, I think, the unique dimension that each leader brings. They've got an overall philosophy. They plug in these different elements, and there's a cohesiveness to the way that they all fit together and work together. Yeah. It's fascinating as I've talked to many different guests to hear how different leaders define leadership differently, but they all kind of revolve around this idea ultimately of creating an environment that unlocks the potential of the people that you're leading. I was talking to Kiva Kolstein last week. He's the CRO of AlphaSense. And I asked him the same question, and he did define it as, my job is to create environments. I create environments for my people, but these are unique environments. These are environments that essentially unlock asymmetric value in terms of the people that operate in them. And I think that kind of comes back to the idea of creating the net surplus of value as a leader, rather than being the black hole that just keeps sucking in and not giving anything back out there.
That really resonates. That really resonates with me. It feels very aligned.
Yeah. Well, John, this has been an awesome conversation, and talk about just a cohesive philosophy. As you've shared these different anecdotes and stories, I feel like we really have a better sense for who you are as a leader, someone that's curious, someone that's focused on building systems at scale that create value for the people in the organization. But ultimately, this idea of servant leadership, being cognizant of the people that you're working with, elevating them and empowering them to essentially, be the next CRO. And I think those are very qualities that we can all aspire to.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight. Nothing would make me happier than to be succeeded in every role by somebody who's very purposely came up through my organization.
I love it. Great attitude. Well, listen, John, all the best to you. And thank you again for spending some time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Justin. Good talking to you.
You've been listening to Revenue Mavericks, sponsored by Tarot. Tarot is the AI-native revenue operating system that Revenue Mavericks count on to increase forecasting precision and sales productivity. Follow Tarot on LinkedIn for new episode drops and updates. Thanks for listening.